Thank you for being here. We have two guests with us today. Gemma Lopez, who is helping us out in finance right now, and
Jason Temple,
Jason Temple, who is our
Chief Operating
COO.
Officer of Public Services.
Yeah. Jason has a presentation today that we're going to review. Before we do that, let's if you can take a look at the minutes from the last meeting.
Yeah.
I'll just do my signature. I'll just hold it on you. Nah, you're fine.
Normally, Liz has been able to get these out in advance, but it was a busy week. Any thoughts, any comments? Any motion?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Okay, second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who made, Wayne, did you make that motion?
Yeah, Wayne.
Okay.
Or John.
And Tom, you seconded?
Or hey, you.
And, any discussion on it? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, Jason has a presentation that would like to make, and he was talking to John Paul, and John Paul asked us to take a look at it. So it's all yours.
Well, hello, Finance Committee. This is the first time I've had to present to Finance Committees, but here's our project. Our 2020 budget has $500,000 planned budgeted for culvert repair and replacement as part of kind of an 8 to 10 year long-term replacement program. We have thousands of culverts here in the village that need to be replaced, but we don't have to do it all at once. We can do it in a prioritized and programmed manner. And given we just recently went out for bids to get this project bid out, and we have a lot of good numbers, and we had 12 locations, of which in the meantime this year our staff, I think, already replaced one of the locations, so we're down to, and they're going to do a second one, so we only have 10 locations that we're going to contract this work out for. And one of the locations is at the Diamante Pond in DeSoto, where you have those steel plates kind of bridging over a sunken area, and that's where the culverts are crossing the road that kind of control the water level for the Diamante Pond. So we got bids, we've got good numbers, and we have a variety of options to pursue. Just real quick, we can either replace with concrete pipe, which is the old standard. We can replace with plastic pipe, or we could slip line an existing corrugated metal pipe with a black plastic pipe through there and not disturb the surface. And we also have a variety of backfills, everything from a flowable fill, which is a very thin, a light concrete backfill, and what we call select fill, which is standard highway road-based backup. So we have all those varieties. We can do the whole project for under $500,000 by using a variety of those choices. And so what we're looking at to the committee is when would be a good time to start this project, as a whole or as pieces, because we could do this as pieces as long as we kind of finish all the work by the end of the year, and that would help our cash flow as far as money coming in and money going out. It doesn't have to go out at once. It would take at least to November. If we were to start, say, in July, it would take till November to complete this project, and the contractor would be billing partial payments on a monthly basis. So the cash flow, as far as paying out, would be over a period of five months potentially, and so that would spread that cost out to roughly $100,000 a month. We can do all or as little of it as we financially are able to do. But specifically, we probably should try to address that Diamante Pond and DeSoto Boulevard if we can do anything sooner than later. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. These 10 locations,
I think last year, in the earlier presentation, I saw you had prioritized them, and some were critical. Are all of these 10 critical?
Yes, sir. Several of them, I think at least half of them are on DeSoto Boulevard. And so a lot of these culverts that are crossing DeSoto Boulevard are fairly deep, they're fairly large, and we just don't want to have a catastrophic failure on DeSoto Boulevard that we have to rush and take care of. They're not hard to fix. They take about a week to fix at each location, but just to kind of stay ahead of the game here a little bit and stay ahead of this and be in control, we would like to go ahead and get half of these on DeSoto Boulevard fixed, and then the others are throughout the village.
I was just gonna add to what Jason said as far as options here. We can do one contract for the whole, 10 and understand that it's gonna be paid out over the 5-month period and kind of set those project dates and timelines. Or we can break it up and do individual contracts for each individual project so that we're kind of approving them in pieces. So we kind of got two options we could approach this with.
With the
Yeah, as
whole
far as
eight?
sequencing the construction, you can do it either way that Liz explained. But these are volume discount prices, so to speak. We've got the good prices because we did the volume, where as long as we can guarantee the work will go to the contractor in this budget year, we should get prices, the same prices for each of these locations, but we can sequence that construction and that cash flow however you want.
And there's no,
Now, if we get so far along and we say we've got to hold up on cash flow and finish it in the next calendar year, does that dramatically affect our pricing?
Probably not dramatically. We would just have to be willing to negotiate with the contractor. If his material costs increase, that we pay the difference.
Right.
And, once he's under contract, he'll work with us.
Okay.
and are there any economies of scale in batching them or grouping them? I mean, if they're bringing equipment in, it seems it'd be easier to do 5 locations at the same time than
You
each
bring up a
individual.
very good point, because there's usually mobilization costs involved, and so as long as the contractor can come in and keep going from one culvert, and we're only gonna allow him to work on one at a time, especially on the DeSoto Boulevard, we won't be too disruptive. So he would start and finish that culvert and then go to the next one. If I put too much distance between him finishing and starting the next one, he might have to demobilize and leave the site and then come back and charge me another mobilization cost. That is, and we would know that up front if we spaced this out too far, but I'd be able to come back and tell you that.
Could you give us just a ballpark guess as to what that difference might be
It's about $800
per
roughly to,
location?
well, per mobilization. So let's say contractor comes in, he does 3 culverts, and then we say stop, and then he leaves to go do work somewhere else. When he comes back, I'm gonna probably have to pay $800 to $1,000 for him to mobilize his equipment, load it up on trailers, bring it in, stuff like that. That's not a big deal, but it could add up to be a couple extra $1,000, but not a big deal on a project this size.
And again, maybe dumb questions, but overall, 500,000, if it's $800 for 10 location, that's 8,000?
Mhm.
I think it would cost us less less in interest than to pay the 8,000 at one fell swoop. It's just a thought,
Well,
if that makes sense.
What, the question, I think, is if we decide to go forward and the board votes for it, then we move forward on the list. And if we have to pull off, we would incur that $800, but we wouldn't pay it all at one time anyway. We'd be paying it over 5 months.
Right. If the contractor's pace was, he could start and finish a culvert 1 per week, this would take 10 weeks, weather permitting. So let's say it takes 12 weeks, that's 3 months. And so he could be done as soon as 3 months, or he could spread it out, as the weather and things like that require it. And right now, a lot of the contractors, they're in catch-up mode. The weather is great, and they are out constructing, so they got a lot of work to catch up with. So they're not really in a hurry to get started tomorrow. They would love to get started on this project late July, early August, which gives us more time to get our finances built up for that.
Jason, will you just kind of walk them through, again, this is the first kind of capital project we've brought to the committee to talk about this before taking it to the board. So I just kind of want to cover, we went out to bid with an RFP, scope of work. How many bids went out, I mean, to how many vendors and how many responses did we get?
We sent it out to at least 6 vendors. Just off the top of my head, we had 2 responses that were very interested in working here in the village. And there should have been 3. We've had a contractor we worked with in the past that he just got tied up, with another project and couldn't bid on this. But so we've had multiple vendors bid on this. So these are competitive prices. And the normal process is staff has done analysis of the bids. The next step would be we would go and put all the documents together, submit it to the board for review and an approval. And upon that approval, they would authorize someone to execute the agreement, and then from there, staff would pretty much administer that project from there on, and that's how it works.
Jason, after you let out the contract, does anybody kind of watch how the project is going and kind of keep track? I mean, does there still...
Resident inspection?
Yes.
On large projects, like when we did the water plant and some of the wastewater treatment plant improvements, we'll hire a resident inspector who's usually part of the engineering staff that comes out and watches that project and makes sure things are done on a daily basis. This project is fairly simple enough. They start and finish within a week. Our own staff will be out there.
They'll just kind of check on it every day when
Yes,
they're
sir.
out there, how things are going.
Making sure their traffic control's up, making sure, things are operating in a safe manner, and that's not our responsibility. We're just a team player
Yeah.
in that, and coordinating. And so we have lots of eyes, and we watch that construction, because the important part of it is not when they demo it, but when they start building it back up. We really want a good job in the backfill and making sure that when that's done, we don't create another dip in the road, so to speak.
Have you worked with this contractor before?
No, I haven't, but I've known this contractor for a while. This contractor that we're talking about is Mosier Construction, and they do a lot of work they do a lot of work for Fountain Lakes, the school districts. They're doing a lot of work for the school district, Jessieville and Fountain Lake school districts, and they're just a large variety general contractor. They do all kinds of work, and they do a lot of water line utility work for North Carolina Regional Water District outside of us. So this is very compatible to the type of work they do.
And that was the low bid?
Yes.
And Jason, you may have answered this question when I was gone, but you would start with the one where the metal plates are on DeSoto?
Yes, sir.
Because it's
Yes,
the
sir.
worst?
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, it is the worst, because that's the one you see the
Well,
most. You're right.
yeah.
It is.
Are any
They're
others?
all bad, but
Are
they're-
any others on DeSoto also have metal plates across the road?
Not yet. None of the other places are moving. The one at Diamante we were monitoring for months, and it got to a point where it was starting to settle at a 1/4 inch per month, and pretty soon we knew that rate we wouldn't be able to. It would be cars would be bottoming out and scraping, and we had to bridge over it or start the construction. And so the steel plates are a temporary device to buy us time to get this project going.
Do you want to talk about what the impact is of the Diamante work on traffic?
Well, that particular location
On
it
Dan.
is on the Diamante Pond is the most difficult one to do as far as a detour route. It could go as quick as a week, it could maybe as long as 2 weeks, but the folks that will be east of that location, if you want to go to the west side of the village, you got to go all the way out Eastgate and come down Balearic to go to the east side. So folks that are located east of that location will be fairly inconvenienced for at least a week, and you will have to go way around to go to the west side of the village. The same thing on the folks who are on the west side. They'll have to go out to Balearic and go to Highway 5 and come back through the East Gate to get into the East Gate area.
It's the Balboa Gate that you would have to go out and then
That's
come
right.
around to the east.
But it would be, and the emergency services and the fire department, they would all be in coordination with this, and we would try to expedite the process as quick as possible.
more questions or thoughts? And you're saying that would start the 3rd or 4th week of July?
Well, let's assume, assuming you took this to the board in June, that's my phone, excuse me.
$20 to the employee benefit fund.
That's right. Cash in the pot there. Sorry about that. Let's say that we got board approval in June, we would take a few weeks to get the contract documents all together, and we'd execute contract. Contractor could show up sometime in July. If we execute it in July, contractor show up sometime in August.
Well, I would say we can also approve in June and execute a contract that has a start date in August.
Absolutely.
So we can put those project dates in the contract and kind of go on and get it lined up and get it on the contractor's schedule and do some stuff like that and start a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm more concerned in getting the work done and getting people taken care of as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really would like to try to finish this project in this budget year, so we don't have carryovers or anything like that. But kind of nice to,
Liz?
we'll be starting with a new budget next year.
Jason,
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
is Mosier your preferred vendor at this point?
Based on cost, based on
Are
cost.
they local? or-
They are. They're a Little Rock, I think, area.
I've seen them working in the area quite a bit.
You'll see their signs on Highway 7. They're doing work.
Have you worked with them before?
Not in the village, and no, not directly, but I do know the manager for that, and we actually were working with him on a couple of other projects that just never came to fruition.
Liz, how's our cash flow relative to,
At this point, I mean, it looks okay right now. I haven't closed out June yet completely and taken that kind of snapshot look at where we're at. I would think that would figure into our recommendation as we kind of regroup following June, or following May, when we close out May and get these financial reports wrapped up this next week and taking a look at that cash position. I think we're okay.
thank you.
And this was, I mean, as far as the capital that we held, this was what we had identified as our top priority to be released. And the first thing that should release the funds. I think now that we've got guidance on the PPP forgiveness too, that brings a little bit of a full circle to this, that we should be able to move forward with this project if everything looks good.
We have, this would be 500,000, then we have 300,000 for the sewer plant, I believe.
That we never held. The sewer plant wasn't put on hold because that contract has already been executed.
Okay.
He means outflow of cash, I think.
Outflow of cash, yes, but as far as what we had held for capital, that was not included in that, so,
Was this 500 part of your 1.7?
yes.
Okay.
Jason, if you take just a second, I know that the culvert situation is extremely large in the village, the situation. It's a large project over 10 years. How many more, you mentioned all these were criticals, these 10, how many more criticals remain?
I'm shooting from the hip, but last year I remember in the PowerPoint presentation, I think we identified around 139 what we call condition 1 culverts that were, that we need to fund to, or sooner than later, to try to fix. Now, each one we can monitor.
Right.
Each one has a different decay rate.
And these aren't your first 10, obviously. You've done some last year, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we've been doing culverts for several years. It was just, we had a question that was asked last year about what was the magnitude of it all. And when we actually went out and did surveys and we actually GPSed every culvert and rated every culvert, I was really surprised to realize we had nearly 4,000 culverts here in the village, of which, 130 something of them needed attention, within the next year or two. And I want you to know that staff has also been changing out the easier ones at a rate of one culvert a week for some time now. And so on a good year, your staff could do maybe 40, culvert replacements themselves, and that does kind of help provide some relief to the deal. But and they're focused on the smaller, high priority, condition 1 culverts too as well.
And if you look at our 2020 capital budget under streets, there was money set aside for that in-house culvert work, and then there was the $500,000, which was set aside for a general contractor to do this bigger work. So we kind of did break it out in the budget so that we were tracking both of those separately.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
I'm good.
I think from a staff perspective and kind of understanding this, I guess the question for us is, does the committee support us moving forward, taking this to the board in June? And if not, I mean, or what are the concerns or questions they would want to see answered by that time, or that kind of thing?
Well, I think the first question is, where do we stand as of the end of May?
Mhm.
Because if we find that we're in a tougher position, then I don't think that the board should necessarily go through with all of it. But it's a matter of where we stand, I believe. So I guess I would put it off for the moment, and maybe we reconvene right before the board meeting, and just to take a look at that question.
I know one of the last board meetings that they were very much concerned about the contract and the way it was read and what it was even called. Is this something where we should look at the contract itself and try to answer any questions that the board might have about the contract?
The last contract really had to do with, it was kind of shortened and not the complete contract. And the concern was whether or not there was an arbitration clause in the contract and that it was being used for something other than a contract for general construction work. It was a construction contract.
Yes.
And that hadn't been removed from the document. So the contract that they've been using is a standard one that's used, and it is complete, so.
Yeah.
And
The attorneys prepared for us several contract templates, basically. There's a large project, one which would have been something like on the pool that had, a huge scope to it and things like that. And then there's our kind of small project agreement, which is what we typically use most of the time. It's a little bit more of a set dollar value and set dates, parameters. So we've used it for the dredging and things like that. That particular one ended up with the word construction in the title of it from some prior use and didn't get taken out. And there is actually an arbitration clause in there. It was under disputes and not under arbitration.
Okay.
So, but I think that both the insurance companies and attorneys have reviewed those and helped prepare those for us so that we were being really consistent in our contracting practices. And that happened in, I think, mid to late 18 was when we kind of said, okay, give us this document that we can work with consistently, so that it's not different every time we come to the board, and it becomes this familiar thing that we all know we've covered the association appropriately in the right areas with these contracts.
And so it was a good question, but it
Yeah.
was resolved after that board meeting, and there are no current concerns on the contract itself.
I just don't want us to approve of something, and then it goes to the board, and the board asks questions, and we look like a bunch of fools.
Right.
Would rather not do that.
Well, I think the contract portion of it is, as Lloyd said, pretty solid right now.
Okay.
But
But good question.
the question of cash flow is
Yeah.
a bigger one.
Yeah.
Do you have your 10 projects prioritized? No. If you have 100,000, you do this, and 200,000, you do this.
I mean,
So-
we can very easily work it that way. If you tell me, Jason Public Services can spend $200,000, $300,000 between the months of July and September, we can customize our projects to suit that in a staff prioritized manner.
Okay.
Yeah, we're pretty flexible.
So what are your 3 priorities, and how much is each one? How much is the DeSoto Diamante repair gonna cost?
If you're just talking about which culverts, the
Yes.
locations we would
And how much,
prefer?
for just the top 3?
Okay. Diamante and DeSoto, and it is roughly $83,000, kind of rounded off, and that is going back in with a concrete pipe and flowable fill. The next one would be there's culverts going into Magellan Pond that crosses I guess it's not Ponce de Leon, but it's right there at that intersection. There's there's 5 big 60-inch culverts. They're huge. And that's over $110,000. It's over $110,000. We still haven't decided on which type to go with there. We're talking with the contractor on that one, but whichever version we go with is over $110,000. And then the next one is on on Balearic Pass Ponderosa Way. There is 2 48-inch diameter culverts crossing the road. I think are on a diagonal, and they are over $84,000.
Each?
So yeah, these are the 3 most expensive ones.
No, that site.
They're actually the 3 of the most expensive ones, which that's how I'm prioritizing today. All of them don't show necessary surface dipping or settling or anything like that. The only one that's showing that is the one at DMI Pond.
But I think if we're gonna present to the board to spend $500,000, we should have an option B and maybe even a C.
Sure.
So that if they deem that 500,000 is too expensive, maybe we'll only spend 300,000, or we're gonna spend 250.
Right.
Give them some options, and then you'll be ahead of the game to be able to select those programs and
Sure.
do the contract.
Yeah, that's a good way to go about it. If you want to just tell me how much money is available, then we'll prioritize that and we'll put that in our presentation to the board.
But you need to tell us which are the priorities that we really need to address this year.
Yeah,
Jason.
that would be helpful.
I think
if we have a-
Jama and Jason and I can probably work on putting that together to come back to the committee once we see that cash flow situation too.
I think what
Kind of a final recommendation.
what I wanted to say was the one at Diamante Pond, in my opinion, is critical to the image of the village. And if it's only $800 to remobilize, then I would ask that we go forward with at least starting with that. And you're talking $83,000. And then, depending on our cash flow, move to the next most critical, but to go over those steel plates, that doesn't look good.
Right.
I mean, it's just an idea.
Mhm.
Yeah, we just need to see what our situation is. Right now, cash is king, so we've got to be really careful about what we're spending and where we're spending. So,
One more
all right,
question.
Jason, it would be helpful if you could take those 10 and just list them 1 to 10. Sure. But you would probably do it
We'll do it.
in that order. Okay.
One more quick question, if I may. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
sure.
I think I heard something a while back that the slip-in lines are the least expensive route. And what prevents that? Or is there a temporary something that it may only last 2 years, but it might buy us a little time at a slightly less, at a cash savings? Is that a possibility?
They're not always the cheapest.
Okay.
A lot of times it depends on the conditions. If the existing culvert has perfect roundness to it, it's just rotted out on the bottom, but it hasn't sunken, a lot of times we can slip line those and there's no disruption to the surface. But if it has, or shows potential of making it difficult to slip line, or if the alternatives are cheaper, and in some cases the other alternatives are cheaper than doing that, that's how we base that decision.
Just one more thing.
Must be interesting. Go.
No, it's not. It's just that generally in the past, you see this happen. If after they put it in and they backfill it correctly and they do a good job, the road's not gonna sink, right? We're not gonna get that dip that you normally see.
That's definitely the goal. It makes me very frustrated when we spend a lot of money
Yeah.
to fix a bump just to make a new bump. So we have very good options. The select fill, if you properly compact it, you have very little settling. There's always just a little bit, but not something that's gonna be a nuisance. if it's done right. And one of the things is, instead of using select fill, which is highway standard gravel, we've gone to a flowable fill, which hardens up like concrete, but not quite as strong. So there's no settlement there. The only place for things to settle is the asphalt. And if we do a good job of putting the asphalt in and rolling it, it has very little place to settle. So we've improved the techniques of building culverts so that we have very, very little chance of settling at the surface, because I feel exactly like you do. I really want that to be a smooth transition as best as possible. And so it has to do with quality control during construction.
It's called 95% compaction.
We do 98. Exceed your expectations.
As far as other major projects that you have in the works, do you have any other major ones?
As far as major, we always do a certain amount of road paving every year, and this year it's going to be broken down into a lot of asphalt patches and overlays, large sections, but not the big, long overlays like on DeSoto Boulevard. It's more like we've got $80,000 in a contract that we're going to set up for a small contractor to come in and do our patching, and then we've got another $250,000 in what we call surface treatments, that we'll be going in and trying to do a little bit, some of the larger scale pavement treatments in the village. That's coming down the road, and it certainly can wait a little bit until we get our finances squared away.
We have some catch-up to do.
Right.
To pay. How much catch-up do you have?
Let me bring all that together. I have a huge database, and our Public Services Committee is working right now to prioritize for next year's budget, and let me get that settled and I'll bring it back. As far as catch-up goes, it's
Just a rough order.
Well, when I first got here, we were spending $2 million a year overlaying roads where parts of the road didn't need to be overlaid. It really just needed to be spot fixed, and that's what we started to do. But over the years, we've reduced our street maintenance budget down to like 1.2 million, and that 1.2 million doesn't all go to overlaying streets. Maybe 600, 800,000 of that does that. The rest of it goes to crack sealing. The rest of it goes to culverts. The rest of it goes to trees and debris, and just a variety in dam maintenance on our lake dams, mowing on the lake dams, a variety of services that we provide the village. But your roads do deserve more budgeting for the future to keep them up to the standard that I think the villagers expect, where there's potholes are filled up within 30 days, shoulders are repaired fairly quickly, and that's a combination of working with getting general contractors under contract and some in-house work at the same time. So, if we can get more budgeting in that area, we'll definitely increase the rate of maintenance on our streets. It's a relative statement. What's the condition of our streets? You look at our streets, and to our villagers, they need to be glassy, smooth, and perfect. That's the standard. You go outside the village, and there's potholes and cracks and everything, and that's the standard. We just all accept that as normal. So it's a relative statement. What is the reasonable, what I would call the minimum standard level of care? And that is where emergency services and everybody who drives their car needs to be able to have access to wherever they want to go without having a major disruption or bottoming out in their car. It needs to be functional, as well as look as good as possible. That's reasonable for the village. So it's a relative thing. It's constantly going back and forth to what level, glassy smooth to a few cracks and potholes that aren't really structurally causing any problems.
Can I ask maybe one more question? I'm sorry. If you look at what's going to be our financial policy, in the second section, operating and budget policy, if you look at F, Hot Springs Village POA will maintain all of its assets at a level such that it protects the capital investment and minimizes the future maintenance and replacement costs. Basically, ounce of prevention, pound of cure.
Right.
And since you're here, and it's something, it's a beautiful building, and it was in the CMP, it's the Balboa Club building. I heard that you were gonna be looking at a lot of our assets. And if the roof is leaking, is that something that we would wanna try to correct?
Absolutely, and the roof, the leaks in the roof have been fixed. I met with Mike Sikora. Today, we actually went out there with one of the board members and toured the site, and one of Cooper's engineers, who was part of the original construction of that
Ernie?
facility. Yeah, Mr. Ernie Deaton. And we brought everybody up to speed on what we know. And so the question is, what's the level of care that's necessary to preserve the value of that building?
Yes.
And so you're absolutely right. A roof is a vital component of every facility. If you take care of the leaks, the structure is gonna stay pretty strong. If you let it leak, then you're gonna start having deterioration inside the building that you're gonna have to add costs to catch up down the road. The Balboa building, the roof is old, but it's in good shape. We have done, repairs and fixed the leaks as we've gone, as well as the air conditioning system inside the building that keeps the interior from, dehumidified and keeps the interior in okay condition. But the first floor is actually an active working floor. The second floor the carpet's been taken up and there's been nothing going on there. It's kind of a storage facility. But what I can tell you is that building has been maintained to where the deterioration rate is nil, okay? Just something like, we've kept it, we've preserved it, and we've kept it there. So when the day comes that we all figure out what we're gonna do with it, we don't have a catch-up of investment to restore that building too far. They can just take it from where it's at and move forward with whatever you wanna do.
Thank you.
Does that help? Okay. And we just recently did another survey on all the buildings, and working with Liz, who's built a huge database on those buildings, so we can get an idea of what are all the buildings that we have, what they're numbered, what's the condition of those buildings, kind of like the question you just asked me. With that database, we should be able to answer those questions on all our buildings, and what is the current need and future need of those building assets. You got the Balboa Club, you've got the 19th hole, all our buildings there, we're all trying to preserve them, hold them in place until we figure out what is the next steps, and what are the future needs for that. That'll benefit the POA, or the village.
Thank you.
Very good. Good job.
Thank
Good,
you.
Jason.
You're welcome, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, to answer your question on what our needs, according to the future street management, not counting what we rolled forward from 2019, comes up to about $13 million that management sees in the future that we're gonna have for street maintenance. A lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money. And that's over how long?
Well, this year it was 1.45, and 21 it's supposed to be 1.9, 22 2.4, anything beyond that's 7.4 million.
And that was that 10-year plan on the culverts
Yeah.
that Jason was talking about, that really makes up a lot of that.
So they have a
Future.
nice deal for all the departments that Liz had done, and we got this during our budget ad hoc meeting.
Right. Yeah, I just don't remember all the numbers.
Thanks, Jason.
Y'all take care.
Thanks a lot, take care. All right. Marketing subcommittee status, just give you an update. We have 3 members that are already ready to go. We have 3 interviews this week?
Renewed, yeah, 1 already and 2 more, and hopefully 2 more.
So we are making some good progress there. We hope to have a total of 7 members on the committee. So we're pleased with the progress we've made so far. And the hope is that sometime next week we'll be able to put together an organizational meeting with that group to get started. Report of the CMP review that was done for last meeting. Any thoughts or comments on On anything that came out of that? I think they did a nice job of reviewing everything, and thank you for doing that.
Tom did.
Well, Tom says all three of you did, so that's. Anything, any questions or comments on it?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. There's a lot of quiet right now. Yeah, I think that group did an excellent job because it's quite a lengthy, difficult read. And I had read it before a couple times, waddled through most of it, tried to backtrack your steps and where you can cross-reference your points and where you got them from, and to see if I fell into a consensus with what your group thought, what the group thought, and I have to say I did for the most part. You know, preserving the feel of the village, financial stability, and diversified housing. You know, that last part, you know, how do we go do that? But I think most important thing right now, for me anyway, is protecting what we have and improving it in any way we can, given our financial situation, which we have to get a handle on first, obviously, before anything else. Okay, that's a given. But you know, I think if you listen to a lot of other people talk about what they like in the village, through various media, and people by and large, from what I gather, there's diverse viewpoints, but there's a lot the village has going for it. You know, the natural beauty, the amenities, maintaining those. But I just want to say, I think you guys did a good job, and you know, some of the concerns too, like the wayfinding, considering, and things like that. I think, yeah, that my own personal opinion, that can be pushed off for the future. Not that it wouldn't be beneficial, but it's not an immediate need at all. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on anything, but I thought you guys did a good job. I had to take about 3 or 4 different cuts. I didn't do it in an 8-hour day. That was like a couple of hours. Go do something for another hour or two, come back again. But, no, good job.
Well, there is content that can be used as we begin the planning process for the future. We've got to establish what our baseline is right now from a financial standpoint, and then we can start putting together strategies of what the plan should be over 3 and 5 years. I'm pleased that we have some things that we can pull out of that document that are very functional and positive, and look forward to getting started on the planning side. All right. The budget oversight discussion. Last week we looked at the budget strategies document. We were going to take a look at that and see if we had any suggested changes or questions or discussion points for that. Were there any suggested changes?
Sad to say, I have a ton.
Well, it was either you or Wayne. That was okay.
Wayne and I have not spoken. But I encourage him to speak first.
Did you have any suggested changes for?
No.
Because they have not spoken.
Oh, and he helped develop them, so.
That's right. Right, Tom.
So I go down my long hairy list?
Sure.
Okay. Sad to say, I don't know what phase one, phase two, et cetera are. So I think we need to define them, at least for my purpose. I mean, if I'm the only person in the room, then don't bother defining it, but
You're referring to the.
Well, it says, yeah, it
Phase
says
one, phase two,
phase one,
those are
phase
the state phases.
Those,
yeah, but I don't know what they
Actually,
are.
federal, that's
yeah,
federal
those are the
guidelines.
federal ones set out by the president's office
Okay.
of what phase one, phase two, phase three, and phase four might look like.
Because when I Googled it, I got two different lists. I got phase one through phase three, and I got phase one through phase four.
Yeah.
But you're just saying Google better,
Well,
and that's fine.
No,
Okay.
the government,
Yeah.
each state actually
Yeah.
dictates what their individual phases are, but the federal government provided a
Right.
four-phase program
guidance.
to work.
But I just have to know what they are.
Yeah,
And-
right,
and
right
I'll
now,
say-
we're in phase one.
we're still in phase one, and phase two keeps seeming further and further away.
Inching away.
But what's happened is internally, our team, Jamie Caperton in particular, because she had the most connection with our amenities and kind of our outside touch places there, has taken those federal and state guidelines and started to work with the recreation department and the golf department and everything else to figure out what phase one looks like in that department and what does phase two look like. And that's how we've been operating since March 17th. And they've got these phased reopening plans and stuff that we're working on. So as far as when you give that as a directive, or the board puts that as a guideline to staff, the staff are very clear on what that means as far as their operations.
So, Tom, what's happening will be that the discussion sessions of the board will now start taking up some guidance to give to the departments and the staff as to how they should proceed with their budget development. Should they stay in phase one? Should they look at phase two? Do they do the, like we talked about before, the worst case, best case scenario, or do they do a middle of the road and a worst case scenario? That's kind of what we need to do to give the staff some guidance on how they should start looking at the 2021 budget.
Okay, but you're saying for whatever communication purposes necessary, excluding me, the definitions of phase one, phase two are sufficiently well understood, that they need not be defined.
Well, we'll have to define them, I think, in terms of what that means for the village.
It's
What
been
is-
defined
what is-
internally, I guess is
it's
what I'm
already
saying.
defined.
Stacy knows what phase one looks like at each of her recreation facilities, and it may be different at each facility.
Well,
And-
we need to share that. That's the point.
Yeah, and I think that's the point you're getting
Yes.
to,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that took a while.
Generally, when I go down to the three-year strategies, they seem very general, and very few of them were specific. Was that intentional?
So the discussion session.
I mean, I'll just give you an example.
Okay,
Under maintenance, and this is not a strategy, one of the things I wrote and was resolve Balboa Golf Course and Balboa Club. Again, that's not a strategy. I mean, that's a hard goal.
But that's fine, we can make that a guidance.
Well,
That's
but-
one of the things we have to address.
Okay. And probably, as far as strategy is concerned, this is probably my favorite, which is, we need to strategize on how to increase revenues and diversify revenues, in particular for the purpose of trying to fund our capital needs. And when I say capital needs, I usually go straight back to the OM tables. And this is me, I add up the first 3 years, 2020, 2021, and 2022, and I get 36 million. And I'm not saying that entire 36 million has to be funded. But otherwise, we just don't have that amount of money, and the gap is gigantic. So, do we have a strategy to try to shrink that gap? I'm not aware of any. So in terms of a strategy, I look at that and say, look at those OM tables and get comfortable about what they say, try to have some kind of an idea of what's critical, what's not critical, blah, 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 prioritize. And then work on the other side, which is how are we gonna fund that? And that's a fairly specific strategy as opposed to, when I read the 3-year strategies, they're just very general statements.
Well, there are two issues there. One is the long-range plan, and the other is the 2021 budget. And the 2021 budget may not necessarily address all of that, but the plan has to.
Right.
And so this particular thing is for budget strategies.
Okay.
And so I think we have to stay with 2021 on this, and then look at the long-range strategy for how we diversify our revenue.
I guess I kind of see what you're saying, but
Maybe strategy is the wrong word when we're talking about this for the 2021 budget. Maybe
Those are budget assumptions.
it's budget
Goals.
assumptions and guidance from the board on what they want to see
Right.
in the development of the 2021 budget, or what assumptions and bases that they are saying include in this budget. And if, last year the directive was, we want to see the Balboa project, tell us what your recommendation is and how you can pay for it. And so that was what the first draft came forward with, and then they went, oh, no, we don't want that now, that was too much. And so we said, okay, fine, we'll pull it out and go. And so I think that's, how the board provides that direction. And what we experienced in the budget was, there was those big things like include the Balboa project, but there wasn't some of these other things like these general assumptions on that you want to see really conservative estimates on revenue, or you want to see subsidy reductions, or, those kind of things will guide the process pretty well when, for the board to kind of make their expectations clear from the get-go.
Yeah, if we take out the word strategies and put guidance,
okay.
maybe that helps.
I pulled out maybe 3 or 4 things from this document that I think you're talking about. One was the 10% minimum wage increase. We discussed the CPI increase last week, and it was about 0. Utilities, 3% increase. Generally, the conservative estimates. Other things that I wrote down were housing growth assumptions, which I don't know what we're gonna come up with this year or next year. The trajectory of non-paying lots. And I don't know, I guess from a macro standpoint, there are general demographic trends. I think we're targeting essentially retirees, and I think we're kind of at, I haven't researched this, I think we're past the peak of the baby boom wave. We're kind of going down the backside. And right now, at least reading, general media, we may be in for a slow economic recovery. So things like that. Those are things that occur to me as far as a macro assumption.
Well, but there still are 10,000 people retiring every day.
Yeah,
And so that's.
we gotta get our share of
Yeah,
them.
that's still a
Yeah.
whole lot of people, and if we can get a share of those, then that's important.
And we don't even have to get a huge share of those.
And I think that's where we were talking about, continue that marketing plan, that they just redeveloped and with the committee's kind of support and moving that forward and some of that, that was, you know. And honestly, I think, John and Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these recommendations would have looked a whole lot different if we had done this in February than what we're doing right now. I think our current and the current economic conditions and the current happenings in the world have really changed what we probably would have said would have been the direction for 2021.
Yeah,
It's gonna be a lot more pared down and conservative than what our budgets have historically looked like.
Well, on marketing, for example, we need to focus on the 2 or 3 major sources of visitors and not worry so much about California or Colorado or, you know, the #1 state for people moving into the village is Arkansas. So let's focus on Arkansas and let's build that base a little more solidly. And
Yeah.
#2, I think, is Texas.
And the news media is already projecting that there's going to be an exodus from the major cities. So that plays well to rural America. Whether it's Arkansas or not, we need to get our share of that market too.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on the marketing side that we just.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that our budget continues, that the guidance isn't stop marketing just because things are getting tough,
Oh,
right?
absolutely
The
not.
guidance is keep going.
Yeah.
And that still needs to be an area of focus for us.
Absolutely, you
Yeah.
can't stop marketing.
Yeah.
Tom, do you have more stuff, or?
Nope. Well, he changed my perspective.
I wanted to save us about an hour.
Yeah. You did a good job.
Thank you, Dan. And the one thing that I never noticed much in previous budgets, and something that I think is really important to look at in future budgets, is our problem with non-productive lots. And I guess that would probably be in the revenue section.
It's actually, it is in our overall revenue, but it's a huge bad debt expense. It's about
Right.
$4 million a year. And it's called out separately, both on the balance sheet and on the P&L every month and in our budget and our planning. And you know, some of what we have done over the last couple of years is, one, we are trying to address as much bad debt as we possibly can in collections and all of that kind of stuff, obviously. But we've also been that's where that lot suspension strategy comes into, you know, can we get and kind of take some of these out of the pocket when they're not productive anyways? And if someone's not willing to pay on this lot because they don't value it, can we trade and get them a lot that maybe they'll build a house on and not do this one over here that we don't have utility services on, and we don't necessarily want to incur the utility expense to add it at some point down the road. And so that kind of strategic focus to do that is part of it, but honestly, the bad debt is not, it's not an easy fix. We tackled it in 15 really hard after not really doing much about it for a while and got a pretty good influx of collections on it. And then it's kind of going like this, and it's not, you know, we make some movement on it one month and then it backs off the next, and so.
There are a total of 11,000 non-productive lots.
Yeah.
And that's about a third of the village.
And it's continuing to grow.
Right.
It gets bigger every year. Is there, if we start to highlight that in a budget, if we start to look, is there things that we can do to make the change the direction of the non-productive lots, where maybe people continue to pay their assessments on pieces of property that are out someplace that they probably aren't going to build on in the future?
Well, in the past, they sold what they called amenity lots.
Yeah.
And those did well for a long time. But then in the 2008 downturn, a lot of those stopped paying. And so we have to weigh how we do that. And a lot of those amenity lots were sold to people within the region.
Yeah. I
And, you know,
bought one.
so that people could come in and play golf.
And then Troon came and basically said, well, you don't need to buy a lot any longer. You can become a member
Well-
and play at member prices.
Yeah, the member thing actually started before Troon.
Before Troon?
Yeah, and it was, at the time, there was a lot of consternation about it because we weren't tying them to the village. We were just,
Yeah.
you know, taking some payments for a short period of time.
It was a short-term
Yeah.
solution, I
And
guess.
so there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had about that.
Well,
And-
and just to tell you where we're at with that, we've stopped marketing it. We don't send out, I mean, a whole lot on it other than the people that are renewing it, so it's decreased quite a bit. We upped the price to make sure it was more expensive to do the membership than it was to pay assessments for a year. So just kind of trying to, without knocking off the people that were actively sending us checks completely, how do you shift that to where purchasing the lot and paying the assessments is more valuable than that membership? And so we talked a lot about that in the fees committee back in 20,
Well, this, the.
17,
board-
18.
Yeah, the board needs to take this lot strategy up, and I don't know if this committee needs to be the one that makes some recommendations to them, but we have got to put the pizzazz back in lot sales, and the only way you're gonna do that is to get the realtor community involved. And they're not going to sell lots when they make $325 for all the effort that it takes, which is the same effort it takes to sell a house.
Right.
And so that whole philosophy on how that operates has got to be retooled. We've got to raise the value of the lots.
yeah.
Yes, somehow.
You have to make it more valuable in someone's eyes.
Correct.
So that, well, that's the other thing, that's the difference between the buying it for the amenities and buying the lot and the land. A lot of people bought it for the amenities and not really for the value of owning property or the commitment of owning property.
There's a lot of people out there that are professing that the admission to the amenities in here is a lot,
Yes.
at the minimum. So that philosophy, we need to address that. But back on the suspension lot strategy, where are we on that, and who is responsible for that?
I honestly couldn't tell you where we're at with that because that's not been my area. Renee would be your expert on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've
That
asked-
really worked on that, and so, I mean, I'm sure you can talk about that. But the idea behind it is we have whole neighborhoods and streets out there that don't have water and wastewater service connected to them or down there. And so if we are going to take some areas of the village and say, you know what, if we own all this pocket, if the POA owns all this pocket, and we just kind of take it offline by owning it, then we prevent maintenance expense, maintaining roads and fire hydrants and stuff like that, or having to put in water, wastewater service to a whole road that's way out in the boonies that has nothing on it. Right now, we're in a position, if one person that owns that lot decides they want to build back there, we've got to provide the services all the way back to it. And so if we can be more strategic about what areas we're encouraging building in and construction in to limit our costs or our liabilities to put in infrastructure where we,
Future commitments.
yeah, we already have a lot of infrastructure that's not being utilized. So let's try to encourage people to build in the areas where we've already got that stuff in place. And again, if you can trade a lot with someone and get them a lot, maybe it's hilly and they can't build on it really well and there's no utility services and they're kind of wanting to sell it, we can maintain that property owner and get them a lot that they now value, that they can build on, that we don't have to put more infrastructure cost into. That's the idea behind that trade and suspension strategy.
Yeah, I've already asked Renee to come to a July meeting and kind of give us a rundown of what she does, what the inventory is, what it looks like, and so that we have a sense of that. And between this committee and the marketing subcommittee, I think we'll look at some marketing strategies that we can put together and then ultimately it'll come out of this committee to the board.
And I said that, well, there are some aspects of it that traditionally we've talked to in the board in executive session, because sometimes when we're trying to acquire properties in a certain area for a strategic reason that benefits us, if we start talking about what area and what neighborhood and what street, the price to acquire that property might cost us. And so Renee has been pretty hush-hush about specific areas where we're trying to do certain things. Especially if we're trying to trade lots and get people in, so that, in some cases, we're doing it for that suspension thing. In some cases, we've been able to acquire a whole section of property to turn around and sell it to a builder to get them to build houses on a whole neighborhood or do something like that, which a lot of times these builders would like to do. Kind of that whole area at once, instead of having, you know, it's the same thing we were talking about with the streets, having to remobilize and move around and move crews and stuff, so.
But we do have several proposals that have been made by different property owners that we should look at. We should also look at what's currently going on, what the philosophy was with trying to trigger more building from existing lot holders on the theory that it increases the assessment revenue. And, you know, just how do we want to treat the 3,500 lots that we own? And, you know, that's a big number in itself, and it doesn't seem to go down. So
And we pay tax on it.
Yeah.
We do. The tax liability on all the lots we own, I think, is about $50,000 a year.
I
But
guess
it's
all I was
50,000.
saying
Yeah,
is maybe
it
this
is. I
should
mean,
be
it's-
something that we should look at on a monthly basis. It's something that's important,
Absolutely.
and maybe it should be part of the budget process. How are we doing?
Well, I think whatever recommendations come out of it will have to be integrated into the budget process.
Do we turn, are no pays turned into the credit bureau or anything?
Not necessarily. It's kind of, I would have to get the legal kind of piece on it, on whether how we could credit report on them, but they do go to a collection agency, but that collection agency isn't necessarily doing credit reporting.
And the success rate, fairly low.
We get probably steadily about between $10,000 and $15,000 a month in from collections when they're able to maintain and payment plans with people and start getting it down. But, you know, sometimes those payment plans are less than it's incurring every month because they still own the property. And so we maybe are getting them caught up. We try to do some payment plans in-house if we can catch them before we hit the point we send to collections and try to help get them caught up. You know, but they start getting letters from us as soon as it goes past due at 30 days, and then we just kind of, it progresses if we don't hear from them, and they start calling, and then.
All right, we should get back to the guidance document.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
We left out fees, and I guess there's a couple of ways of dealing with that. I know the Recreation Committee normally looks at that every year and discusses what the fees should be, leave them alone, raise them a little bit, so on and so forth. Do we want to go down that same road and let them go down that same path, or set some direction for them before they get involved in that discussion? And I hate for them to go down a road and then we, for some reason or other, decide that wasn't the appropriate road.
Well, what's the feeling?
Question, how do they, are we talking about like golf fees?
All the other fees, yep, every fee. Pickleball fees, you name it.
I think generally, there's some people, like Tom Blakeman, that talk about the elasticity of demand versus price. Especially with golf, I think he's presenting a valid point. But what you would need to do, you would need to be able to get some, you need to have data. If you're going to change a price, you want to see how that price affects demand. And it might not be right away. It might take a month or so in order for the word to get out that pricing is such and such. But I think you'd love to be able to, you know, when somebody comes up with a price for their product, they don't say, well, this is the price and it's going to be this price for the rest of the year. They look and they say, we did this with this price in Arkansas and we saw a jump in sales. So they look at it closely and they think, well, let's move it around a little bit and see what else happens. I think we need to come up with more data, or maybe there is data already that, like I would love to have an idea, a crazy idea. We talk about 210,000 rounds a year versus at its peak, 2008, 2009, you were looking at about 360,000 rounds a year. It's a lot of golf. There's all kinds of things that you can do, but I'd love to be able to say that the people that are currently playing, maybe they're playing once a week or less than once a week, what would happen to the rounds per year if now everybody that was currently playing, instead of playing just once, they play twice? And maybe you could say, okay, from a Sunday to a Saturday with your POA number, you play one round at the regular price. If you play a second round, 50% of normal pricing. Would that encourage more activity? Now what you would want to do is you would want to come up with a report that would basically take out the annuals, take out the people that don't have numbers, you know, people that are just coming in from BB or wherever and playing one time, and get a feel for how many times, like, is it, if 90%, if there's only 10% of the people that are currently playing play twice a week or more, that's 90% that we can touch possibly with our price. But if you were going to do that, you'd want to come up with a financial report that would tell you the effect that it had. And you'd actually have to come up with a plan, how you would be able to pull that data from our database and be able to continue to watch that data. But I think just pricing something like golf and just coming up with one price for a whole year is kind of,
That's
I
why
don't
we have
know.
flex pricing in golf, so that they can adjust pricing based on demand and seasonality and
Yeah.
some other stuff.
Like changing a menu.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tom, I mean, what are your thoughts on this episode? We did this fees committee where we specifically spent 2 years looking at fees and our approach to fees.
We never really got to golf. I mean, we started out on
We
golf.
worked on golf,
We
but-
started out on golf, we did a fair amount of work, but then sort of midstream, we switched to lakes and permits.
Mhm. And then we circled
and then-
back and did some roundtables and stuff.
Yeah, and then we never really got back to golf. And,
It seems like that's our number one revenue generator potential, and it's extremely costly to us. It ought to be our number one priority, the fee structure.
And my suggestion, which is probably taking a step back from what you're saying, is we need to do a deep dive on golf.
Yeah.
For the exact reasons that you just stated.
Yeah.
And I definitely have some thoughts about price elasticity on golf, but without the underlying information,
Yeah,
to
and
a certain degree, we'd be taking a shot in the dark.
and we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But maybe we can come up with that data.
Well, my thought is that the golf department or the golf committee spends quite a bit of time talking about some of this stuff. And so how would we try to engage that committee, that's their focus, and connect and
Could the
work
board
together?
just make a suggestion to the golf committee what can you do to increase revenue? Instead of saying this is what our revenue is going to be based upon how many play days we have or what have you,
Well, and I think
then we
that-
affect revenue.
The report that Tom Lakeman just sent to this committee needs to go to the golf committee too. So,
Didn't get a
It
copy
didn't
of
go to
that.
this committee.
huh?
It didn't go to the
I,
committee.
I received the copy right before.
I didn't get a copy.
No, it said he didn't have their email.
I got 2
I've
copies.
got it, if anybody wants to see it.
Did
Well,
you get it?
I didn't print off.
It's
a
floating
42
out there with
page
the intent of coming
It's
to
42 pages.
summation, but here's,
We got them 3
and
times.
I
I have
would doubt
copies
some
of
of
it.
those figures. If 9 holes cost 75,
Oh.
I'm not sure
Yeah,
the
it went
figures are
out this
accurate,
morning.
because if
Yeah.
9 holes is
Mr. Lakeman sent it
$75,
out to,
I'd be very, very
trying to
surprised.
get
I'll
everybody
read
on
it
this
eventually.
committee, but
I got 3
Yes.
emails from Marcy, and there was no attachments.
Same
nothing.
here.
He
Well, no.
I checked my email.
couldn't attach it, he couldn't
So-
reply all and attach.
I do have mine now.
I think he sent it at
Yeah,
3:15.
he
I hope.
did, he sent it about an hour before this meeting.
yeah.
I just want to say on golf, when we did the ad hoc budget committee, we went back to 2013, and the best year we had was just a little over $6 million in revenue. And since then, it's declined. I think we did 5.7, maybe 5.8 this year, but our costs continue to rise. I mean, we're approaching $8 million to do golf. And so not only do we have to look at revenue, somehow we got to figure out how to reduce the expenses and also get more plays. More plays will get us to a certain point, but we still have escalating costs. And there's just got to be a better way to manage golf courses. I don't know what it is, but
It's a big deal.
it is.
Well, it is, and in my opinion, the courses have deteriorated substantially, as I keep hearing they're in the best shape they've ever been, and I don't know what courses they're playing from a personal standpoint.
Well,
The
what we-
costs
but
are increasing,
We,
but,
we need to do a deep dive
Yes,
into
we
the
really
cost
do.
structure and everything for.
and what we're getting in terms
But
of,
like Jason Templeton said about the roads, everybody expects in the village that they be glass smooth. And you go outside, they're not. And are our standards of maintaining our golf courses for the rate that we charge, should we be having PGA rated courses? You know, I don't know.
yeah.
Or
I
it might be
don't-
different from golf course, maybe if the golf course that we're really gonna promote is Isabella, 27 holes, maybe that one is treated one way, where Coronado, where I play at, maybe it's not quite the same quality as what you would see at Granada or Isabella. It doesn't, all 8 golf courses don't have to be exactly the same.
And they may not be.
They shouldn't.
I think they have a surcharge on Granada now, it's sort of a
Surcharge on it.
flagship course.
Surcharges on everybody.
Yeah, $2.
You had, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, Morris.
That's right.
You had handed this out last time, and I thought, well, this, I don't know how well, but I looked at this, and I think this would be terrific to have in all the 75 departments, to break down the exact revenue, whether if you take Waypoint, the coffee and food, the canoes or the kayaks, and so on and so forth. And then we could also see what our expenses are, because, you know, when I was in the ad hoc budget deal, getting allocation, you know, we're looking at restaurants, the DeSoto Club is extremely expensive and over budget, but how much of an allocation to that building are they actually having, trying to absorb, that's distorting what they're actually able to produce?
No, I agree with you, particularly since I handed that sample out.
But, you know, we have to look at how we account for each of those restaurants consistently.
Well, this would be a
And we're
good
not
start to our
consistent right
zero balance, bottom-up budgeting.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, you say we're not consistent in what?
Well, like we charge for utilities at one, but we don't charge for utilities at
It-
another.
Only if it's in the leaser's name or not. And some of them have combined meters.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's really based on the facility.
Yeah, but I think the point is, they're not all handled exactly the same, they're different, so you can't lump them all together.
No, and
You
they're
gotta-
not lumped
You
together.
gotta look
Each-
at them individually.
Each location has its own budget and gets its own cost, direct costs allocated to it,
Right,
so.
but, you know, if you're at DeSoto, that the cost of the utilities there is absorbed into the overall operation.
Only a portion of it, the rest of it's put to the pro shop. So part of it is allocated to the pro shop and part of it is allocated to the restaurant. I believe that one's based on square footage.
But it's only it's an allocation, it's not a metered.
Yeah,
Yes.
the bill from the electric bill each month is split on a certain percentage between the two departments,
Yeah, so it's allocated.
Yeah.
Okay.
which is appropriate. I mean, as long as you have a consistent method for how that's determined. And that's only at facilities with shared meters.
But like Isabella.
They have 2 different meters.
Right.
So the restaurant's meter has its own bill and the pro shop's meter has its own bill.
But I'm with Wayne, if we can get to this point,
Well,
this is a real goal.
significant progress. And-
Yeah.
And Gemma had a form earlier today that showed current year budget and prior year for overall reporting, which would be great to have. And we need to work towards getting to those points in our reporting, so the board has a more easily digestible report that they can get every month, right?
Absolutely.
Okay? All right. Have we beaten this to death?
Yes. I have the change from last time to change it from phase 3 and phase 4 to phase 2 and phase 3, so, I'll make that change electronically and then send it out.
All right. Well, the changes I have on here, one is changing strategies to guidance.
Okay?
Under revenue, increase and diversify the revenue sources. Marketing, I think it should read, continue marketing spending and evolve with market conditions. And the second point, I think it's a greater emphasis on internal marketing for amenity usage.
Yeah, that was that second bullet point that's here.
Then there was a question of recommendation on the surcharge.
That would fall under revenue,
Any thoughts?
or reserves, but, yeah.
Concern of how it's reported, how it's going to be spent.
Or should it still be there? And do we want to include that in a recommendation to the board?
To continue the golf surcharge or stop it.
Wasn't that connected to the Balboa issue?
Well, the surcharge is on all golf, so.
But I
Not
was under the
just-
impression that money was to be to fix like the golf cart pass at Balboa and things like that.
It's not assigned to that.
It's not a specific.
It's
golf
future
course.
repairs and replacement for golf, whether
Okay.
that's
For
Balboa
golf.
or to what form that takes is yet to be determined, but.
I think it'd be a little bit premature until we start seeing some budget numbers and where we're going to be.
Yeah, and it gets into
And
the whole-
projections of how many rounds that we're actually gonna have,
Mhm.
before we make a recommendation of doing away with that 2.5 per round charge.
All right.
And it gets into that fee discussion also.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to touch on it because it came up, so.
So do we want to say continue for now and further evaluation may say it's
I just
removed?
stay silent on it.
Just stay silent, okay.
We have a reserve for the golf courses. Did we want to make a recommendation to find a solution for the building, Balboa building?
I'd stay away from that. I think you maintain it so that we're not, so it's still gonna be a structure when somebody possibly wants it or uses it in the future. But boy,
Well, there is some activity going on at the board level discussion on activities that might be considered for the Balboa Club, but it's not reached the discussion level of input from the community yet. So, it's sitting out there and it needs to be discussed, but I don't know that this group needs to be taking it up right now.
Okay.
My thought is that based on the conversation of facilities and streets were really the only focus, and to put any amenity capital on hold unless it's critical, it wouldn't be a 21 focus at this time, because right now there's so much unknown as far as
The cash flow is,
cash flows and what
They
it's
gotta
gonna look
survive.
like.
right.
So that was kind of my assumption, is that yes, it's not that it's going away, but that because of the situation we're currently in, it just may not be possible.
All right. There was a question about, do we want to put a housing growth assumption in here?
Well, Mike Sells, was he talking about 125 per year was his goal of new
I think
rooftops, or
I think it was 25.
it was just 25?
No, it's 75 this year.
75.
75, and I
currently
think
is
Mike was
75.
talking about maybe a goal of 125.
Well, but that came again back from, basically from the CMP, which was one of the
Okay.
goals of that was to do 2,500 rooftops in 20 years,
And so,
basically.
okay.
And so that's where the goal of 125 came from.
We were at 60 last year, the goal was increased to 75 this year.
Do we want to make an assumption for the budget?
I don't think the total amount that revenue will bring is significant enough to warrant that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
It
talking about
shapes our permitting and
$75,000.
inspections and our utility revenues. It is a revenue driver in those two areas.
But it's just 25 or 75 or 125. It's not like we're losing a couple thousand unproductive lots. Unproductive lots more important than rooftops.
Yeah.
And the people that own those lots right now are gonna continue to pay their assessment at $35 it's not like they're gonna stop paying their assessment. If you've got a lot on a golf course, the likelihood is you're gonna pay your assessments every month because that lot has value.
From a strategic standpoint, the lot situation is more important than setting some goal for housing build, because the market's gonna dictate that to some extent. But if we can sell more lots, then I think that helps increase that goal also.
Well, and is there a lot sales growth number even, that we've kind of set those two separately in the past, where this lot sales versus new homes
Right.
are two different
They are.
targets.
All right, we have trajectory of non-performing lots. Do we want to address whether we're going to reduce the number of non-performing lots or anything of that nature?
Non-performing meaning
Not paying assessment.
Nothing.
not
I
paying
mean,
assessment.
decrease the amount of default, percentage of default that we've been seeing in the past, or fully?
I mean, for budgeting purposes.
If you're telling us to budget conservatively, I would not budget to reduce the non-performing lots or that bad debt adjustment. An conservative approach would be to assume that maybe you're not gonna get that cash.
We don't know the financial situation of the people that own those lots right
Right,
now in
John.
particular. It could be even worse than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
It could be that we're gonna see even an increase in non-productive lots. That's the problem, and it's gonna
We'd be
affect,
fortunate if it did not increase.
Okay.
Yes.
and it'll have a dramatic effect upon our assessment revenues,
I
which
think
we
until we
should
start,
protect.
until we start selling more lots, you can probably predict that number is what, around 200 right now a year that we're adding to, right?
It's $4 million that we
Well,
assume
correct,
is
but I'm talking about-
uncollectible in a year. That's really what you're talking about right there, is how much of our assessments that we're billing in a year do we make the assumption that we're never gonna collect?
Yeah, and that's
But
right
the-
at it's
So-
right at $4 million.
3.9 right now.
Right.
And we're adding about 200 lots.
About 200 lots a year is where the growth rate is going.
And that's what we need to bring.
Yeah, that needs to be reversed, but I don't think we can plan on anything being any less than where it is today.
I mean, I'd say strategically, you want to focus on reducing that number. Budgeting wise, no.
Right.
Leave that as a more conservative number until you start to see that trend
All right, so,
moving.
Good way to put
so
it.
do we want to put it that we hold the number of non-performing lots
That would,
consistent?
that would be fantastic.
I think we should,
If we could.
simply because we'd like to sell more lots, but on the other side is the economy on the outside. You know, there's a lot of unemployed people and, you know, not homeowners, but business owners and that. So we don't know, if we're gonna get more non-payment from those individuals. So if we just hold where we are, then we should be able to adjust mid-year.
Okay, all right,
I actually am gonna put that up under revenue because it is,
yeah. that's
it's
fine.
truly an adjustment to revenue that gets made because we say we're
Yes.
not gonna get it.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about on that? All right, ad hoc budget committee report was just for, information purposes. Did anybody have anything they wanted to talk about on that at this point?
Yeah, having sat through the meetings last year, I think it was John, you presented your own research based on, I think, another municipality. And it had trend numbers.
Well, it showed several prior years.
Right.
On the same spreadsheet.
Right.
And then a working year-to-date
Right.
against the budget, so.
But I know when I look at our financials, I oftentimes have to reconstruct our trend numbers. And being that I just, do it by myself, they're not official. And it would be nice, and maybe this committee can decide whether this is a useful idea or not, for there to be, just for a select number of key financial statistics, just historical trend numbers. I mean, just high-level stuff like, revenues or assessment and expenses, things like that.
We need to get more into the trends because, looking at a single month as a year-to-date number
Right.
doesn't enable you to really even analyze what that means. And that's something that, we need to be doing on a monthly basis.
Right. Well, I'm thinking annual numbers going back to like
Oh, yeah.
2015 or something like that.
Well, Tom, I think we made some good inroads on that, because before it was last year's budget versus
Right.
this year's budget. And Liz worked hard and showed last year's budget, the forecast of, at the end of her forecast for 2019, and proposed budget. I'm not sure if she even threw 18 in there, but we did get some history in there. But it would be nice to see all the trends and just do away with budgeting, seeing last year's budget and versus what we actually have.
And the really good news is, once you do it, you don't have to do it again until next year.
You just add another column.
Right, you just have another copy.
All right. All right, if nothing else on that report, finance policy, Liz wants to make some recommendations on some of the points there, so she hasn't had a chance to do that, so we're gonna put that on hold. I think we were planning to do that for the July meeting anyway, okay?
Well, and I'll just say, I don't know if everybody knows, but I'm not going to be here after the next 2 weeks. And so I've talked with Jama quite a bit today, and she's got some of my thoughts on that and recommendations, and kind of where I was at, and Jama, please feel free to speak up here, is my biggest concern about addressing our financial policies is we worked really, really hard to get to a place where we were having clean audits and that our finance functions were running where we can produce timely, accurate data. to the community, to the board. And so I just don't want to see us do anything broadly and quickly that could unintendedly, I mean, with unintended consequences, affect that. And so what she and I have talked about a little bit, and I'll stop talking here in a minute and let her talk, but is instead of trying to rewrite a new fiscal policy or financial policy, we need to pull the parts out of this that we really like and compare to what we have in place and amend our current policies. And just in case, I have them, I don't have to pass them out right now, but I do have for each of you guys a stack of the current, what I would consider our financial policies if we were going to move these into their own section of the policy guidebook kind of thing. And so, because the proposed policy has elements of a lot of this stuff in it, and so there may be something in the proposed policy where there's a section where we go, you know, we really like that part, and it's not in what we have right now. Let's amend what we have right now and kind of build up on that. And Jim, if you want to kind of pick up from there.
I did see good parts in both, our current and the proposed. I think it's important to come up with policies that will last for a while. Let's not name names, let's not talk about CMPs and strategic plan. Let's make it an all-encompassing policy that can just go forward. Because, you know, what we're doing now, we're going to have to remove names and titles.
Sometimes titles need to be in there to delegate some authority,
the person.
but yeah.
And then we have the CMP, we have strategic plan. I think there's a way that we can make it more all-encompassing and have longevity.
Okay.
But still, they both have very good parts. I mean, I really like the part of this one, and then over here I like the part of this one, and so it's going to take some doing to get it just right, though.
It always does.
And so that, I guess that probably came as a shock to several people, but Liz has announced her resignation and has provided 2 weeks' notice. JAMA has agreed to come in and work with Liz over the next couple of weeks and help shepherd in whatever changes are going to happen in the future. So, and we appreciate your stepping forward, JAMA.
And my goal over the next couple of weeks really is to try to, you know, get stuff out of my head and on paper or in someone else's hands or delegated so that we can kind of have a smooth transition here and think about this. And she and I talked about quite a bit and what we were looking at. Probably anybody other than accountants that get real particular about words, it would not make any difference to anybody else, but because we kind of pulled the sample from a different governing type, there's words in there that, while seemingly harmless, actually really could fundamentally change our accounting structure. And so I feel like she's got a really good grasp on that, and you don't need me to sit here and nitpick and wordsmith through it. She's
going to let me do it.
a little bit, just because she picked up on it so quickly when we started talking about it. She's going, oh no, you can't use that word, you can't. And that was kind of some of the same stuff when I said I had concerns about it, that when I was reading through it, I was going, oh, it was, the accountant in me was going, cringe, we can't do that. And again, they're words that in the regular world mean nothing to anybody, but when you say it to an accountant or when you put it in an accounting policy, we go, okay, that means something different.
Okay. All right. Well.
So I'll give these to everybody.
That'll be fine.
Oh, thank you.
And I've got all of the policies, and then I also pulled, because we kind of talked about that in the procurement policy, the kind of conflict of interest or the conduct statement, and that we really liked. And so I pulled the conflict of interest statement out of the personnel policy manual that has very similar language and actually sets a dollar amount for, you know, because we have churches and groups like that like to show up and bring lunch for employees, you know, our teams, and show their support and gratitude and stuff like that. So the personnel policy manual kind of sets some real clear parameters, and so we talked about making sure language was the same across all documents. So I got that together for you guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The procurement policy, were there any more comments on that? I'll call on William last. Do we,
I didn't have anything.
do we feel good about it? Do we want to pass it to the board?
I would ask that maybe you hold off on this one a couple weeks and let JAMA take a look at it and get to know our staff and some of our processes and stuff and make sure that that the committee and the board then understand if it has any implications of how it would change, because it is changing existing policies and practices in some ways quite a bit, so.
Okay, we can, wanna wait till July for it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, we'll plan on it for the July meeting. All right, capitalization policy we have to work on. Depreciation, the same thing. Investment policy, did we get a copy of that?
No.
Where we were?
We were gonna send it off, first, but I can send a copy out either way, it doesn't matter. And I do have, and I haven't talked to you about this yet, but I have kind of files on each of these policies and some of the conversations that have been had over time, and some of the research and samples and stuff that we've already compiled, that I can pass on for those kind of conversations. I would say the other one that you wanna add to that list is, the refund policy.
Right.
The refund policy?
Yeah, how do we handle refund?
Yeah, okay.
We also have, the records from IT.
Right, yeah, the records inspection, it's currently the IT policy, and it includes all of our records retention, and the intention was to separate those and say, IT policies here and record retention is here. I'll tell you, Ella has done quite a bit of work on the records retention side of it already, and so I think that she could probably wrap that up and send it back up to you guys to look at. We were kind of at the point where it needed to go to an attorney and a CPA in Arkansas to review the recommendations to make sure we were keeping everything we needed to keep for the right periods of time.
All right. So we have the budget guidance that we're going to go ahead and submit. The marketing subcommittee should be active next week. We will probably put together a working group for planning in about a week or so. And so our next meeting is not scheduled for, as of right now.
Dan, just as a kind of a process note, the committee probably needs to vote to approve the charter for the subcommittee.
I checked on that today and you don't.
Okay.
Not for the board. If you guys want to internally.
The subcommittee doesn't have to approve the charter to create their own to create the subcommittee? Okay.
You mean for the marketing?
For the marketing subcommittee, yeah.
It already exists, doesn't it?
No, actually, I was with Ella this
We have
afternoon
to
and we
do it.
discussed it.
We have to do it. Do we
Do we have that authority?
Does the board have to vote on the marketing subcommittee?
No.
It's
No,
just
the
this-
committee can create its own subcommittees, but the action needs, I thought the action had to be taken by the committee as a whole.
Probably should.
Yeah, I will send, I haven't sent that out.
You want a motion?
But you haven't received it yet. Go ahead.
I second.
I will send it out this week, and, we'll, I guess what I'd like to do is have another meeting.
Tuesday?
Tuesday if we can.
Or Thursday.
So
I'm just asking you, I'm making sure your schedule's going.
my schedule is suitably screwed up. Why don't we plan on next Tuesday and the Tuesday after, which is the day before the board meeting? Because we're going to want to look at the numbers before the board votes on the $500,000.
Okay, so I have the 9th and the 16th both at
Right.
4 o'clock here, if, assuming it's open, but since the facility's not open, it shouldn't be an issue.
I would assume that it probably will be okay. All right? Does that work for everybody?
You'll also probably next
I want to
week,
get to a schedule that's not every week, but for the moment,
you probably also need to elect a new secretary before, after, next week.
yeah, we'll do that next week.
Dan, I have 2 items, so whenever.
You're up. Go ahead.
We have cataloged, the final
You might
catalog.
come up here because the
Oh,
microphone's
we have the final cataloging of all the documents that are throughout the entire policy that apply to, really? That apply to, finance, accounting, and planning. So the question was, when that was ready, do you want this committee to look through it before? It's cataloged in, note, what is they believed absolute, and then there are some with a few questions.
I hadn't seen it yet, so I pulled together the ones that I thought were, but I'm not sure that those lists match.
They don't, this was an outside group that did this.
Okay.
So, yeah. You want me to give it to Liz to do, or?
No, the committee should just take a look at it. and
Yeah.
see
They may, what I'm saying is, I'm handing you this packet, they may not all be in this packet. If they found something outside of this that they think is financial.
Can I take that and so that we give it out together? So that, or what, how would you like this to be done? I don't want you to be doing.
Here's the,
No,
they
all
can
she's-
take
all she's
these,
doing is passing that out.
they
to
can take
everybody
these
here
today
because it
and
relates to
you
the
can
finance.
send them the list. And if there's some other ones, they're on the website that they can pull them off and add them to this packet.
Yeah, just whatever they did, let's bring it to next week's meeting so that we can.
Okay, you want it in hard copy or electronic, or both?
If you can email it out to everybody.
I can, okay. And then the second thing is, I need to know if you're gonna be considered a staff person or a volunteer or jail.
Jayla?
Yeah,
She's on payroll.
okay. So then, you will be the staff person for this, okay. So we need to then
Interim.
decide.
Interim, she keeps saying that, interim.
We need to decide on staggered terms, which we didn't do.
We did that last week.
We
It's
did
Do I
in our
have
minutes.
that?
1 year.
It's in
It's in
the.
the-
It'll be in the minutes we approve
Okay,
today.
so I need to get that, I'll let you get on that, there we go, I didn't get that.
Ella actually addressed that today, I think.
Yeah,
She did not have it.
well, that's because the committee just approved them today, so they go
Okay.
to Ella or Marcy after the committee approves the
Okay,
minutes.
great, that's all. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Anything else?
Not from here,
Anything for the good of the group?
or the bad of the group.
No? All right, then we'll reconvene next Tuesday.
I'll try to get you minutes before Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you.